Hey folks, Tony here. Today I'm going to talk about global IDs in Laravel. Not sure if you have heard of this package before. It's the one that I use in the rich text Laravel package, which is should have it opened. So whenever we store an attachment like this, well, not images are stored as remote images, but whenever we store eloquent models as attachments in the documents, we need to store a reference in the document itself to the model. And the way we do that in the package is by using the Globalid Laravel package. This package is a port from the gem called Globalid from Rails. It implements the same API. Yeah, so first of all, let's explore the problems. Let's say you have a form where you need to list two different entities. Over here, we have a multi-select field where we list teams and users. And as you can see over here on the right side, if we open the teams options, we see that the value is set to the team ID and the team name as the label of the option. And in the users group, we also have the user ID and the username as the option label. But as you can see, since both teams and users use incremental IDs, there's a sequence for both of them, so their IDs actually collide. And why is that a problem, right? So if we select but team over here, I don't know, maybe the first team and the first user, which both has the ID of 1, and we submit this, we'll get a reviewers as array, and we get just the number 1 twice there. And that's a problem because we don't know which number 1 this belongs to. Like, is this a user or is this a team? These situations, I mean, we have 2 models and 2 repeated IDs, so we know that it's either one of those. But like, let's say we select the first team and the second user. If we submit that, now we have 1 and 2. We don't actually know what this belongs, like which ID belongs to which model. And yeah, so there are many ways that we can go about this to differentiate this in the backend. Maybe you want to implement a custom, like you want to do a custom implementation. So you could prefix them with the model they belong to, like this. And then if we go back to that page and we submit it again, now we have an array where team ID is 1 and user ID is 1. So this gives us a way to differentiate them. But that's not ideal because users could poke around over here and, I don't know, maybe duplicate this and set a different ID for this team and select that and submit to our backend, and then we get something tempered that was tempered by the user. So this team is not actually what we showed them, but what they sent us. Yeah, so there are multiple ways to solve this. All the ways that I can think of, they require some ad hoc implementation. So we would have to, over here in the route that receives the request, we would have to parse the reviewers, group them by the types, either team or users, and do a fetch and all that. That's all doable and all, but yeah, this is the problem that the Globalid Laravel package solves. So let's actually install it and see how we can use it. So if we go back to this and run composer require, now we have to go to the user model and use the has global identification trait over here. And now we go to the team model. Okay, so now that both of these models are using the has global identification trait, now we can change the form, and instead of rendering the ID like that, we can render the global ID of those models. So if we go to GID, to string, And the same over here, gid to string. And then we render the form and we inspect that. We can see that now the option value is the global ID of the model. And we get this string over here, which uniquely identifies, it's basically a URL, or actually a URI to our model in our application. So this is the application name, and this is just the scheme of the URL. Anyways, this is a bit ugly because if we start this anywhere in our application, that means we have the fully qualified class name to the model itself stored, and that's not ideal because we can move this, like we can rename the model, or we can move the model to another namespace and stuff like that. So that's not cool. But what we can do here is we can go to the app service provider in the boot method and use the relation and enforce a morph map. So teams will be models team and user will be models user. And now if we refresh the form, we'll see that the URI is much nicer. Okay, so now that we submit this, we get the global ID of that model, but how do we go, like, how do we translate this to a eloquent model, right? So in the backend, all we have to do here is run the locator, the facade, and locate many, and we pass the reviewers, I believe, reviewers, like this. And then this returns a collection so we can DD that. So over here we have the team ID, the team 1, and the user also 1, I believe, but let's double check. Yeah, ID 1. Okay. Now if we select another team, like let's say we select 2 teams this time, and then we get 2 teams on the backend. So that's cool. But we still have a problem over here that users could tamper with the value ID and set something like 42, and they can send that to the backend, which would blow up. And this is actually a locator exception, because so if you pass a global ID to the locator and it can't find one of the models, you have to, it will fail, because I mean you were expecting to find something, right? If you want to tell the locator to ignore missing, you can do just that. Ignore missing, set to true, and then you can submit again, and that will let me submit that again. So I'm gonna change this to 42, and I'm gonna select both of this, and boom, now we get 1 because that ID that didn't exist. But yeah, now we can filter this correction and all that. And yeah, so this is how you can go about it. But yeah, as I said, users can still tamper with the form over here and send weird data to our backend, and that's not what we want, right? So to prevent that, we can use signed global IDs. And signed global IDs, they are cryptographically signed using a derived key from your app secret, so you don't have to worry about it. We simply use 2 SGID instead of 2 GID. And in the backend, instead of locate many, we can use locate many signed. If we just change this and we check the value, now we can't actually tell what's going on over here, but as you can see, so if we copy this over here, the value, just the base64, so this is the global ID, the signed global ID, and this is the signature over here. And if we decode this, you can see the contents of the value. I'm gonna pipe that. So this is actually what is being encoded over here. We have the global ID, we have the purpose, which is something that we'll see soon, and we have an expiration date. By default, the signed global IDs, they are valid for a month. And after that, they actually expire, so you can't locate them. You can, of course, set this to whatever you want. It's just the default. So if we try this code, actually, let's try that and submit this, then we get the same thing that we were getting. So we get a team and a user. That's cool. But this is actually not done yet. So this signed global ID can be used anywhere. The purpose of it is set to default, which means anything, which is not great because users could still use the signed global IDs from other forms inside our application and use that within different forms and send data that we are not expecting and all that. So that's not cool. What we can do about it is we can set a purpose for the signed global ID. And it has to match from what you sent in the form and what you're passing to the locator. So over here, when we are rendering the option, we can actually set the purpose, which is the for, and we can say reviewers form like this and like this. And when we are locating, let's submit without changing the locate, and then we can see what happens. So now if we try to decode this part over here, let's see what we get first. So over here in the purpose, we have reviewers form. And again, this is signed, so users can't just change this JSON and code it again and, create other signed global IDs. That's not how it works. So if we try to submit this form now, it won't work because we haven't changed the locator over here to specify the same purpose. So we can actually specify over here that reviewers form. So it has to use the same purpose as the signed global IDs when we are signing them. And now, without any luck, it should just work the same way. It's much safer now that we generated this signed global IDs specifically for this form, and now in the backend we are locating the global IDs with that purpose in mind. So there are other things that we could do here, like we can control, as I said, the expiration. So we can do that globally like this. By default, it sets to a month, but yeah, we can do like 3 months or 5 minutes or whatever. We can also control the expiration when we are assigning the global ID. So this will have precedence over the global ID. So yeah, that's what I had to show actually. It's a much faster video, but something that may be useful for you whenever you have a polymorphic situation and you want to send either one type of model or another, a reference to different type of models. That's usually when you want to apply polymorphism. You can use the Globalid Laravel package. Oh, and one more thing. Let me go back to using global IDs instead and delete this. So now if we refresh, we should get the global ID string, which we do. That's great. So yeah, we get the URI over here of the global ID. And since we are sending this data as a form submit, this is actually fine. But if we are sending that in the URL as a query string or a route param, something like that, this might generate some conflicts with the URLs and the paths and stuff like that. So yeah, to avoid those issues, you can convert that to, you can call it 2param instead of 2string, and that will convert it to a URL safe parameter. So you don't have to worry, and this should just work. So in the backend, when you're locating, we don't have to change anything. It accepts either the URI or the base64 encoded version of the URI, and that should just work. So if we submit this, we get the model and stuff. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share. I hope you find this package useful. It's definitely useful in situations where you need, to implement polymorphism, and you need to accept different kinds of models, different types of models in a route or in a form or wherever. I hope you find this useful, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.